Hello, I'm Robert Yule, and this is the seventh in my series on Genesis 1:26, being a good steward of God's kingdom. Today, we're going to take a look at some of the unanswered questions in the book of Job. Sort of like God gave us a bunch of questions we needed to answer if we want to be good stewards. But before we do that, let's take a review of last week. Last week, we talked about don't become trapped in your narrative. And so I'm going to just give you a couple examples of where in my work in the environmental world, I saw people get trapped by the narrative and unable to make a decision, a better decision, and at times even knowing that they weren't making the best decision. The first example is biodiesel. The narrative is that biologically based fuels are carbon neutral and can be safely used to replace fossil fuels. These are fuels that come from plant matter that are distilled ethanol, biodiesel. These are all examples of that. The plants are removing the carbon dioxide from the air. You consume that as a fuel in an engine, releases the carbon dioxide back into the air. We haven't added any additional carbon dioxide in the air. And so this is environmentally neutral. That's the narrative. The data is not as positive. There's an unintended consequence. Biofuels, especially used cooking oils, which is a popular one for biodiesel, when used in a diesel engine, produce much more soot. And this is a very fine powdered soot. It gets airborne, and that has a larger impact on the environment than the CO2 that we're discussing. The problem is it settles on ice fields and snow and accelerates the melting of them. This is a significant part of why we're seeing glacier retreat and other major impacts on the environment. And so, not good. Second example is an acetone burner. The narrative is that hydrocarbon emissions into the air, they break down and they form smog, they form greenhouse gases, and this is bad for the environment. That is the narrative. And in general, it's a very accurate statement. The difficulty about acetone is that acetone is a very simple molecule, and it doesn't break down, and it doesn't form greenhouse gases. It doesn't form smog. And it's a very commonly used industrial chemical. In most of the United States, by far the majority, acetone by the EPA is an unregulated substance and requires no remediation when you emit it into the environment. It is perfectly safe and harmless. However, I happen to live in Northern California, and the San Francisco Air Quality Control Board is trapped in their narrative, and hydrocarbon emissions are bad and they need to be remediated. Okay, there's two ways to do that. One is you use a burner. The problem with using a burner is that it's burning something, typically natural gas, and it has a significant carbon footprint. More modern technologies use a catalyst type converter that uses lower temperatures and is much more efficient and has a much smaller environmental footprint to operate. Problem is, they don't remediate acetone. It's too simple a molecule. It won't break down in your catalytic type converters. And so these are both examples of being caught in a narrative. And it was heartbreaking for the regulator, the actual person that I was working with at the Air Quality Control Board. She knew what the right answer was. She could not get the board to let her have us stop emitting CO2. And why did I care? Yes, this was the largest carbon footprint we had in the state of California, was running that acetone burner. So, unanswered questions in Job. This is a kind of fun topic. Somebody added them up. I didn't confirm it, but in Job 38 and 39, God asked Job a whole bunch of questions. We don't have the answers for most of them. So I'm just going to give you a couple examples. One of the things he says, hey, consider the ostrich, and kind of talks about the ostrich and its peculiarities and how I believe he calls it stupid. I'm not sure, something like that. However, it turns out that this bird is a great source of red meat, and unlike cows, it emits no greenhouse gases. After carbon dioxide, methane emissions from cattle is the second largest concern for greenhouse gas emissions. You'll see this in like various areas where they're trying to reduce the consumption of beef and limit the number of cattle. There's been quite a bit of protest about this in Europe, where they're very aggressive on this. So maybe we should all be eating ostrich meat instead. By the way, you can get more ostrich meat pound per acre than you can cattle. So it's actually a pretty efficient way of making meat. Another one is God asks a lot of questions about the water cycle. Actually, chapter 38 almost is all about rainfall and rivers and lakes and irrigation and understanding the seas. So if we want to restore habitats, we should pay and understand a lot more about the water cycle and how it all works. If you look at the Sahara Desert, this was caused by deforestation. Man created the Sahara Desert. It was the breadbasket of Europe at one time. We should fix that. Can that be done? China is trying to do it in their Great Desert. And the Israel, they've been very successful in restoring the land. As a matter of fact, we have good photo documentary of a man named Doug Hershey. He found pictures taken by Mark Twain and others in the last 150 years. And then he took the exact same shot today and he wrote a book on it. And it's called Israel Rising. It's amazing how green and lush the landscape is today as compared to what it was before. And the Sea of Galilee has got so much fresh water into it today, courtesy of the Israelis. They're selling the extra water to the people in Jordan, greening that country as well. And the last one I want to share with you, it just was fun for me, and I really enjoy this story. Um, I got to be with Dr. Ballard. This is the guy who found the Titanic and his equipment for exploring the bottom of the ocean. So I was out with him, and he remarked, we have barely understand what's in the ocean. Maybe 3%, certainly less than 5% of the ocean floor has been explored. And when I was out with him, we were literally just looking to see what was there. We weren't looking for anything in particular. We were just surveying the ocean floor. And we saw on the bottom of the ocean, which is mostly just mud, by the way, what looked like a child's toy. And so we drove the sled over to take a closer look at the child's toy, and then it moved. That is a googly-eyed squid. We got to name it. It had never been seen before. It is a beautiful creature. This is off the coast of San Francisco. And there it is. We don't know what's out there. We have so much more to learn. And the more we learn about this world that we live in, the better stewards we will be of it. So I look forward to meeting with you again next week.